All right. Not the person you're expecting to say those words, but yet here I am. And of course, I am here with a few people because this is catching up with Jacob, if you didn't know. First of all, I'm going to start with Jacob. How are you doing? It's good to have you here again, my brother.
Yes, just still getting over my jet lag, but I think, functional. Praise the Lord.
Praise the Lord. Good to have you back in old England, for the time being at least. Moving on, we want to welcome our good friend from down under, Davey. How are you doing?
You're doing good, thanks, and good to be with you guys again.
Praise God. Good to have you. And Pierre, thank you so much for joining us this evening for you, I believe, or morning?
Morning. It's 7:32 in the morning, and good morning, everyone, from a very, very chilly New Zealand. Good to be here again.
Thank you. So great to have you again. And somewhere it is the evening. Of course, Andy decided to stay for a bit of commentary.
Yes, I'll stick around for a while, and it's 10:30 here in the evening, so in a hot and stuffy summer evening. But I'll stick around. It'd be interesting to see what's going on around the world. You know.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
Jacob, any announcements as far as the itinerary, your upcoming speaking engagements?
August 4th, Monday, I'm in Swindon at Blunsdon St. Anthony in Swindon. It is on the itinerary page of the Moriel website, moriel.org, and it's also on the itinerary page of Moriel UK, which has a separate website. Look forward to seeing you there if you're in Reading or the Swindon area or Berkshire or any of those counties going towards the west of England. We'll draw people from as far away as Wiltshire, probably. And it is a place I've been to before. The meeting is at 6:30 p.m. So please, it's at Hope Farm. And again, that's on the Moriel website. It's advertised. Also, both Moriel conferences are now taking registrations online or by telephone. The Moriel Scotland conference, which is in October, will be Pastor Tim Brough and myself. Tim Brough is an excellent Bible expositor. He'll be joining me at Gartmore House for our annual Scotland conference. Marg is taking the bookings. Also, the England and Wales conference in Yarnfield near Stoke-on-Trent, that is in November, and Beryl is taking bookings for that. There, the lineup will include, again, Pastor Chris Brough, who will be joining me, along with Tim Clark from RTN and Tony Pierce from Bridge Lane Chapel and Light for the Last Days in London. That will be in November. So please go to the Moriel website, itinerary page. We'd love to have you join us if you're in the UK.
Thank you so much, Jacob, for the itinerary. Davey, this week you got the duty. Tell us a little bit about podcasts and new channels.
Okay, well, don't forget to subscribe to Moriel Chapel if you haven't. You'll find all the teachings will be up there on Moriel Chapel. Don't forget, our podcast can be found on Apple, Spotify, Buzzsprout. Also, another way to get the teachings too, don't forget we have the USBs available. We've got the Jumpstart with Jacob, and we've got the Quintessential Quintana. So if you're interested in them, you can either email me. They're available in New Zealand. Just email Pierre. In the UK, either email David Passmore or myself, and we'll be sure to get them out to you.
Thank you so much, Davey. On a serious note, two things that I would like to ask for. Of course, Marco is not here. Please pray for traveling mercies for him and his family. Second of all, if you would, could you please pray for Ken, my good friend from Ken's Corner? He is in the hospital again, and your prayers are urgently desired for him. I won't go into too much details, but he is integral to the Ken's Corner show. Can't really have Ken's Corner without Ken. And we love him as a brother in the Lord, and he's a dear friend. So to the Moriel family, please lift him up in prayer. All right, Jacob, let's get caught up. First on the docket, in England, a new British pogrom is going on. Not only are major cities now under the care of Muslim mayors, but there seems to be a pogrom going on against the Jewish community at large. Could you please comment on that, Jacob?
Jews are being attacked in restaurants and thrown out of restaurants. People are going up to them and saying, "Are you a Jew?" and attacking them. And they do so with impunity. The politicized British police will no longer protect Jews or Christians. They may arrest them, but they will not arrest those who oppress them, be they militant homosexual activists or, more frequently, even radical Muslims. Jewish children are going to school in fear. Their parents are afraid to take them to school because they're being attacked by Islamic gangs on their way to school and threatened. You're talking about a pogrom-type environment taking place in much of Europe, but certainly in Great Britain. It has come here. And again, it is happening with the de facto blessings of the present British government. No matter what anyone says, they are allowing and pandering to radical Islam. They're pandering to it, pushing Islamic candidates into positions in parliament and into the mayoralty of British cities, because it is in the political interest of a desperate Labour Party that is otherwise declining. Starmer wants to drop the voting age to 16 in order to gain votes he's not going to be able to get otherwise. But what's taking place is absolutely unbelievable. What's more, the British press and the British government and even the British police are treating British patriots who are opposing these Islamic immigration policies as being racist, as being ultra-right, as being almost neo-Nazis, when in fact the real neo-Nazis are the militant Muslims. The radical Muslims are behaving like Nazis and fascists, but those who are opposing it are being called Nazis and fascists. That is what is happening in Great Britain, and it is happening with the de facto participation of the Starmer government.
Thank you, Jacob. I want to ask a question to maybe Davey and Pierre as well. You guys are part of the English Empire or the British Empire. Is some of that anti-Semitism filtering down to the places in which you live?
Definitely. I think it's far worse over in Australia, and Davey can attest to that. But it's happening here in New Zealand as well. We see it. The media is so on board with this anti-Israel drive. That's the mainstream media, of course. And you see so many times in the media how they spread the lies that you see elsewhere about what the IDF are doing when they're not really doing it, and it's all there to really push the whole anti-Israel agenda. We've seen marches taking place here where you get large groups of people flying Palestinian flags, and again, the absolute joke is that they are filled with people that are from the whole LGBTQ plus community, and they don't understand that they would be absolutely destroyed if they had to go to a place in the Middle East and try and behave like they do. But it's just driven into everything. And as soon as you question people, like elsewhere, they cannot answer you as to what it is that they're actually protesting. They don't understand the whole idea of Israel, and that it's just they are so gullible. They take everything that the mainstream media feeds them, and they just take it in, and then they go and they get on board, and it's part of the whole wokeism approach. You've got to be like that to be fitting in. But as I say, it's far less aggressive in New Zealand than it is in Australia. We have a large movement happening here by a particular church group called Destiny Church. Now they are not a good church in terms of the theology and that, but their members are the only ones who seem to be willing to publicly stand up against this sort of thing. And in the past, they've even provided bodyguards for the British diplomats, the Israeli diplomats who've come over here to New Zealand because they do get targeted. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I think if our government shifts back to a Labour government, we will see exactly what happens in Australia happening here, where it goes to a different level. But I'll pass over to Davey to give some comments from what's going on over in Australia.
Yeah, look, it's pretty bad over here. It's I think it's all the Commonwealth countries, but Australia, it would have to be amongst the worst. I think we're probably on a par with Britain. Maybe Britain is a tad worse at the moment, but no, it is bad. And when you can put the blame down to our government. You can put it down to our government and our leaders, who's kind of like they're all been talk. There's always, every time there's an incident, there's all this talk about, okay, we've got to combat anti-Semitism, and then I'll set up another task force, but nothing's actually ever done. There is a Jewish guy in Melbourne at the moment who is suing the Australian government for their lack of inaction. He's using their own laws. They've brought in all these laws, but they're failing to implement them in any way. The only time they'll implement them is they'll use it, the unpardonable sin seems to be, okay, thou shalt not criticize Islam. That's kind of like the unwritten law here. But the laws, they're bringing in saying that they're for anti-Semitism, they're to protect the Jewish people. They're not being used for those purposes. In fact, they're being used against them. It's only getting worse here for them. And then every time Albo gets up and does a speech like he did yesterday, which would have to be his most anti-Israel speech he's ever given, it's just like throwing kerosene on the fire. It's kind of like, it just inflames it all the more. It is getting really bad here.
Pierre hit onto something that I would like to follow up with, maybe to the whole panel. What we're seeing really is England is being pushed this way. The rest of the world and Europe are being pushed this way because of the narrative of the liberal left media. The media, for example, that with no context at all, is now claiming a humanitarian crisis because of distribution aid of the UN, who is partnered with the Gazans, or the Gazans, to basically hand out food. And the Palestinians are saying there is food shortage because of Israel. So I guess my question to the panel is it any wonder that anti-Semitism is on the rise when at any point the media makes sure to say Israel bad, Israel starving little children in Gaza, and Islam good, they're trying to aid the poor Palestinians?
Well, this argument was actually kind of used to justify the abuse that Jewish students were suffering at a school in New South Wales. One of the what do you call it, like teachers there at the institution was basically saying, oh well, using that argument exactly, kids are being starved in Gaza and all the rest of it. You get what you deserve, basically. I'm paraphrasing, but that was the tone of the message. So, and they wonder why it's happening.
Yeah. Jacob, any comment on this? It is like a libel, basically saying that Israel is a cause of the woes.
Same kind of thing you've always had in pogroms. Blood libel, blaming Jews for the murders, atrocities that they did not perpetrate. What is really happening in Gaza, and the BBC has lied about it, and a British surgeon in Gaza lied about it. Hamas has killed hundreds of its own people. Hundreds of its own people. It wants to control all food distribution. Israel wants the UN to give the food directly to the people instead of giving it to Hamas, who are involved in selling it or sequestering it for its own use to its terrorists. The Israelis let the food in that it would go to the people. Now, I myself did not agree with allowing any food into Gaza until the hostages were released. Put the whole blame at the hands and the feet of Hamas. We'll let the food in once you release the hostages. I don't think any food should have been allowed in till the hostages were released. But the fact is, over 2,000 lorries, over 2,000 trucks of food were taken into Gaza, and the UN, in cooperation with Hamas, is refusing to distribute it. They don't care about the people of Gaza. They are causing the hunger, not the Israelis. But they're openly and outwardly lying about it. Openly and outwardly lying about it. They're lying in the UN in New York. They're lying in Gaza itself. And they're lying on the mainstream media. The British government is disingenuous. The BBC is dishonest. And these left-wing academics wouldn't know the truth if their life depended on it. They are just professional liars. Again, this is the 30s. This is the way it was in the 1930s in Austria and Germany.
Absolutely. To your point, Jacob, recently the UK foreign minister has called out the situation in Gaza as indefensible. Now, where is he getting that information, I wonder?
Now, look, he is a British African, okay? He's not Anglo-Saxon or Anglo-Celtic, okay? He brings those biases. He's not speaking as an Englishman or a Scotsman. Now, I'm not saying they're not Englishmen or Scotsmen who wouldn't agree with it, but he is there because of identity politics. He is there to represent not a British voice, but he is there to represent the kind of voice you have in the UN among those countries with despotic governments throughout the third world. He is in the same league with the government of South Africa politically. He has that mentality. That is the leaning he has. The South African government likewise is anti-Israel. He goes into that left-wing activist mentality mode. That's why he's there. He's not there to represent the interests of Britain. If he were, he'd be concerned about the Islamic takeover of Britain. But he isn't. He's taken $150 million of British taxpayer money and given it to de facto terrorists in Syria. What Lamy is saying about the situation in Gaza is what is really indefensible, a misrepresentation of the facts.
May I ask real quick, Andy, you have relatives, friends, family still in the UK.
Yes, we
they
do. Yeah.
they know where you live. What do they tell you? What is the conversation like with you as they watch the media and then ask you what's going on? Is there any type of interaction there? Is like they hear one narrative and hear from you?
We have our relatives. Well, our relative. Well, our Jewish relatives. Let's put it that way. Okay, the ones that we have on my wife's side of the family, they fall into two camps. I mean, no, three camps really. We have one relative who was gone a bit woke, and I don't think that this particular one would go with all the anti-Semitism. And they're not that, they're not that well, but they definitely lean towards the left. And then we have some of our other relatives who just don't want to know at all. They just stuck their head in the sand and they really don't want to hear anything. They watch the BBC and they watch IT and think that actually they're being told the truth. And then we have one of our daughters and her children. One of the they fall into a different category in that they are very aware of what is going on. They're very concerned, and this has affected their whole the whole way they view the course of their life over the next. I mean, they're not the only ones, I'm sure, who are preparing. They're living in the possibility that they may have to leave the country for a number of different reasons: economic, the possibility of Britain becoming some kind of, I don't know what you call it, Islamo-fascist state or something like that. They're well aware and very concerned about what they see, but it's a mixed bag. I think that broadly reflects what you would have perhaps seen in Germany and Austria in the late 1930s, or at least mid 1930s. There were some people who could see the writing on the wall, and others who didn't want to. They couldn't believe that it would get that bad. They thought it might all blow over, and so.
Yeah, like Jacob said, it looks like a rewind, that we're leading up to a rewind of 1930 as it crescendos to 2030 here in the world today.
I don't think you can ratchet the hate up and not at some point, like it's happening now. I don't think the hate can be ratcheted up and like this continuing without there being some horrible mass violent incidents happening against Jews. Sooner or later, the Muslims will do it.
Yeah,
because they've got nothing. There's no negative side for them in doing it. They don't care, and the authorities are complicit in allowing these things to happen. The British authorities and the government are complicit in this.
Jacob, you mentioned that it is widespread throughout Europe, mostly driven, unfortunately, by immigration from Muslim countries. And what we're seeing now is, again, history repeats itself. It never stops repeating itself, really.
Between Muslims, Islamic immigration, and also the political left.
Yes. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Second Spanish Inquisition that is happening today. Could you talk a little bit about the incident that happened on the airlines, on Vueling Airlines, Jacob, or
Vueling
anyone?
Airlines, a subsidiary of British Airlines. A group of 50, it was 50 French Jewish children, were on a trip to a Jewish camp in Spain, in the area of Valencia. They got on the airplane and was about to take off. They were there with a leader, of the adult woman, was looking after the children, and they began singing a Hebrew song, and they was practicing speaking their Hebrew. Their mother tongue was, of course, French, not Hebrew. But when some of the flight crew heard this, they began complaining and saying that Israel is a terrorist state. Israel is a terrorist state now. When the Islamic bombings took place in Paris, I didn't see any Israelis doing it. Or when the riots took place in the banlieue around Paris, which happened twice, and billions of dollars of damage, billions of euros worth of damage were done by rioting Muslims. I didn't see any Jews rioting. It was all people from Morocco and Algeria and Africa who were Muslims. But they called Israel a terrorist state. And then they called the police, and the Jewish children were ordered off the plane. But the police said that they were not to be filmed. They told people to take their cell phones and put their cell phones on the floor so it was not to be filmed. One of the leaders looking after the children complained. They, on the film shows them roughing her up. By some reports, they beat her up, tackled her face down to the floor. These are 3 men on 1 woman, and handcuffing her and dragging her off the plane. This is a pogrom. This was a pogrom. If that had happened to a Muslim, the world would be up in arms. The world would be up in arms. you were seeing a part of the country of the Spanish Inquisition. Now, this testifies to the stupidity of the Tikkun movement and other people that I saw in Israel, believers, saying that there was a reconciliation for the Spanish Inquisition. No, there wasn't. The Spanish Inquisition was perpetrated by Spanish Roman Catholics, and the climate has not changed. The religion has not changed. The hatred of Jews in the land of the Inquisition has not changed. It is simply a resurfacing of what has always been there. You can't, the idiocy of these people trying to reconcile with the Roman Catholic Church. It's absolute idiocy. The Israeli government sees what's happening. Jewish believers see what's happening. The New Apostolic Reformation in Israel, known as Tikkun, was living in a fantasy world, a delusional world, kissing the feet of a Pope's representative named Lewinkel. Complete madness. They have no sense as to what's happening spiritually. Now, this particularly troubles me. I don't expect anything from the left-wing press. I don't expect anything from the EU or the governments of Europe. I don't expect anything. But I do expect believers to understand the nature of anti-Semitism theologically and spiritually, how it goes back to Genesis 3. But when the body of Yeshua, the body of the Messiah in Israel, is too often dominated by these religious freaks, falsely claiming to be apostles, and speaking all kinds of rubbish and doing stupid things, you have a big problem. A big problem. And they're not seeing what's happening. Perhaps Elo would like to comment further.
Just one comment on the Vueling airlines. Apparently, it's just come out now, and it is now 100% confirmed that the air crew on board the aircraft that protested having Jews on the aircraft, the pilot is let me think, Ivan Chirivelo or something like that. Well, he's the same guy who trained the people that flew the jets into the Twin Towers.
That's what guy.
No, it's now 100% confirmed.
Yes,
that's what they're saying here. It's the same guy. It's now being confirmed 100%. It is confirmed, yeah.
Well, and so
wow,
right?
Yeah, it says here, Ivan Chirivella, the pilot who kicked the Jewish children off the plane, is the same pilot who trained the 9/11 hijackers. It is now 100% confirmed. Well, that's a strange bit of information, but kind of chilling, isn't it?
Indeed. Wow. Pierre, Davey, do you want to comment a little bit about what you saw? Did you have a chance to watch the video that Jacob's talking about of the three men, the Jewish woman? I mean, that says a lot too.
Yes, yeah, I did see the video. No, look, it's absolutely disgusting. And the fact that they can get away with this, like, I'd be taking legal action. Look, if something isn't done, look, this is only going to get worse. This sort of thing will happen more and more. But I think legal action has to be taken, and I think these people need to be held to account.
Mm.
And I'd be boycotting the airline.
Yeah,
I'd be doing all I could.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's, when you look at it and you look at the actions that have been taken and the age of the children as well, this sort of behavior is really reminiscent of what went on just prior to the Second World War. And it's actually quite frightening for Jewish people living in Europe. It's a reality. And I'll say this, is not just in Europe. I know Jewish people living in South Africa who are equally concerned and afraid about their movements, and being targeted all the time because they're Jewish, merely for the fact that they're Jewish. And to have this happen, I think this needs to come out, and it needs to come out in its full context. And people need to open their eyes. But the sad reality is that everyone who buys into all this leftist anti-Israel nonsense, they'll look at it and go, good, it's we're glad that happened. They're not going to for a second look at it and go, what if that was my child? What if that was my young daughter that was looking after those children and was being treated like that? They'll actually celebrate what's happened on the aircraft, and that's the sad reality of this.
Yes.
Yeah.
The
see what
dehumanization.
Yep.
Yeah,
From
that's
the-
exactly what it is. Yeah.
and the advance of Islam. This week, the Roman Catholic Diocese of Buffalo, New York, which Buffalo's a heavy, heavy Roman Catholic city, Polish, Italian, Irish population, heavily Roman Catholic. And like all dioceses, have been implicated in pedophilia, clerical pedophilia, and protection of pedophile sex criminals. There have been instances against Roman Catholic children, but the usual cover-ups and payoffs and so on. They took the Roman Catholic Cathedral of Buffalo and sold it to the Islamic community to turn it into a mosque. Can you imagine the biggest Roman Catholic church and one of the biggest Roman Catholic cities in the United States, demographically, being turned into a mosque? That is what is happening. This has been going on for some time in Britain and in Europe. The Islamic Academy of Great Britain is a big, huge Anglican church in the middle of Manchester. But now it's happening in the United States. It's God's judgment.
I saw it firsthand in Houston during my past visit. What used to be churches are turning into mosques.
Yeah.
Moving on to our next story. This will add fuel to the fire. In an announcement, the Israeli Knesset calls to annex Judea and Samaria in symbolic, non-binding motion. It's moving closer and closer that Israel is asserting control over what was once part of the West Bank. And if you think that the media is going to laud and praise the Jews for this move, I don't think so. Why don't we talk a little bit about that, Jacob, about the move by the government? What is causing them to be this bold? Because they used to give away land not 10 years ago, inch by inch, for the sake of peace. But why the sudden change? Almost a 180.
After what's transpired on October 7th in Gaza and what happened with the Gaza war as a result, the world turning against Israel, Israel no longer has anything to lose. What is going to happen? The Al-Aqsa Brigade is going to launch an attack on Israel. They've already done that. What's going to happen? The world's going to condemn Israel. They're already condemning Israel. Israel no longer has anything to lose. A few months ago, only about 2 months ago or so, we were on the Temple Mount, and for the first time, I saw Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox Jews davening, praying, dancing, touring, and they were up there for religious reasons. That would have caused riots even a few years ago. Not now, but this past week, control of the cave of Machpelah, the tomb of the patriarchs, the burial place of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is in Hebron. There is an adjacent Jewish religious settlement called Kiryat Arba, which is a name found in the book of Genesis in the time of Abraham. And the contentions were so great, I haven't been to Hebron in many, many years, and I would never bring tour groups there. This past week, there were pictures of Orthodox Jewish women, mothers, with babies in carriages and prams, and little kids, little Jewish kids with yarmulkes, kippahs, praying outside the cave of Machpelah. Now, this is the second holiest site in Judaism after the Temple Mount. But it is also a holy site in Islam. You see these moves by the Israelis, and particularly by religious Jewish nationalists in the West Bank, gaining momentum. Well, there was a restraining factor previously. That was international reaction and a war. Well, the war happened anyway, and the international reaction has happened anyway. What do we have to lose? They're attacking us, even if we don't do it. So let's do it. This is what the way it has to be. This is the way things are going, and the momentum that's being gathered. Elon, would you like to comment further?
Well, you really said it there, Yakov. In a sense, we are being funneled in this. The force of circumstance and events are funneling us into this Israel into this course of action. It would be insane to and now after what's happened on in October the 7th to allow this to occur in the Judea and Samaria, which it would be far more serious if there was an outbreak like there was in Gaza, but instead from the Palestinian-controlled areas in Judea and Samaria. It would be right in the heart of Israel, which has a much higher population in the center of the country. So, now we are forced to do it. I think this has been put off for years, actually. I mean, annexation, which eventually will come, as should have been done decades ago. But now we're being forced to do it.
In large measure, at least, I blame Moshe Dayan. But
yes,
what's done is done.
Yes. Yeah.
I'd just like to make a real quick comment. In fact, not very long ago, in fact, 4 months ago, Marco and I were trying to get to the cave of Machpelah to do filming for the film that we're working on, Why Is This Time Different? And we were told as long as we made an appointment, had the proper security, we could go. But you must understand there were all sorts of hoops that we had to basically jump through to get to safely film there. And you look at it today, not 4 months later, you have Jewish mothers bringing children there, where 2 grown men were basically told it's dangerous. And even our fixer said, you can do it, but you need to make contact with certain people who will keep you safe. But now, a complete shift.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Facts on the ground are changing very fast. They really are.
And moving on, we have the West Bank annexation. In the same way, you see it kind of going back to the other side in what is being lauded by many. Macron has decided that in the next few months, he plans to recognize the Palestinian state. And he is being lauded as a world leader by Saudi Arabia and other European countries for his vision of openly welcoming a terrorist state by Hamas that is run by Hamas. Jacob, what is wrong with Macron? Does he realize that he's under siege and that these are the days of Charles Martel?
He doesn't have any sense of history, obviously, or he would realize it's the days of Charles Martel, who protected France from the Islamic invasions. Europe needs another Charles Martel. They need another Jan Sobieski. They need another hero that will save Europe from the Islamic invasion. But they don't want to realize there is an Islamic invasion. But they're going to be forced to realize. Obadiah, verse 15. What they are doing to Israel, siding with Israel's enemies against Israel, those same enemies are going to attack them. It's going to happen, and there have already been instances in Ireland, certainly Britain and France. They've already had it. He thinks this continual placation is going to make a difference. Twice it happened that Paris is surrounded by an area called the banlieue. The banlieue. It is huge. It is a ring of outskirts, not exactly suburbs, but outskirts of Paris. A ring, chock-a-block of Arab, Muslim, Moroccan, Algerian, and African immigrants, almost all of them Muslim. They had horrific riots where Paris was sealed in, burning, fire, billions of euros of damage. It went on for 3 weeks. It was very similar to the riots that took place at Bondi Beach and Cronulla in Sydney in Australia, only much bigger and went on longer. These Muslims are going to riot in Australia, riot in England, as they did in the Bradford riots. They're going to riot in France. But this idea, keep placating them, keep placating them, keep placating them. France has been a nation of placators. Not since Napoleon has France ever stood up for itself. And I'm no fan of Napoleon, but at least the French were not cowards in the days of Napoleon. They were hardly champions of justice, but they were not cowards. After World War I, after the Verdun, France mutated into a nation of cowards. You had over 60 French divisions at the time of Dunkirk who refused to fight. Who refused to fight? You had the Vichy in France. They placated Hitler. They placated the Nazis. They gave their country. They gave Paris over to the Nazis and wouldn't fight. Now, there were some French who did, but they were in the minority. The mainstream French acquiesced to the Nazis. Well, the mainstream French are acquiescing once again. You have the neo-Vichy. That is what Macron is. He's neo-Vichy. He panders to the foreign invader of France. He is living up to the tradition that was once a nation of courage and turned it into a nation of cowardice, as we saw in World War II. Remember, France withdrew from NATO, withdrew its troops from NATO, and hid on back of the Anglo-American defense perimeter that was in Germany. The headquarters of NATO was in Paris and had to be relocated to Brussels under de Gaulle. The French didn't want to be in NATO. They wanted their independence and show how tough they are and how independent they are. They couldn't fight the Nazis. They let the Americans and British liberate their country. They handed their countries to the Nazis on a silver platter. And then hid on back of NATO, hid on back of the Americans during the Cold War, hid like a nation of cowards. Well, that tradition of cowardice that has overtaken France, that you saw in the Second World War and in the Cold War, that tradition of French cowardice is back again. That's exactly what is happening. A tradition of national cowardice. Now, the French were not always like that. They had a noble tradition. The French were the first military ally of the United States with Marquis de Lafayette and those people. They were not always like that. They were a brave nation. But they got worse and worse and worse. They were defeated at the Dien Bien Phu in Vietnam. The Americans made a peace treaty with the North Vietnamese and demilitarized, took most of their troops out. The Americans and Australians left. When the Watergate crisis happened, the Vietnamese knew the Americans would not have the political means to come back because Nixon was too vulnerable. So the Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese, broke the treaty and captured North Vietnam invaded South Vietnam and took it over in violation of the treaty they made with Kissinger. Okay. But there was no actual battlefield defeat of the Americans or the Australians. France was defeated at the Dien Bien Phu. They lost. They killed 4.5 times as many North Vietnamese as they lost, but they were defeated. They were defeated in Algeria. They were losers. They were absolute losers. They were losers to the Nazis. They pandered. They gave in. They became known for their cowardice. They gave up a military tradition of noble bravery. Again, Charles Martel stopped Islam from invading Western Europe. They gave up that heritage. William the Conqueror, a French-speaking Viking, invaded England. They had this tradition, and they abandoned it in favor of being a coward. Well, Macron embodies that. He is the embodiment of historical French cowardice that has predominated in France for the last 100 years.
To your point real quickly, Jacob, this is the mystery of France. First of all, you are absolutely correct. They have become kind of a joke or a byword amongst the nations, but yet their pride is still there. They still think that they are a world leader. And I wanted to go to Pierre and you, Davey. You are far removed from the politics of Europe, being on that side of the world. When you look at France, is France a world leader? Should they be injecting themselves into any kind of world politics, considering their status among the nations?
The simple answer is no. I mean, honestly, from our perspective, when you look at France, you've seen a country that is absolutely in chaos. They have so much internal turmoil. They, along with a number of the leaders of other European countries, I think Macron is blinded by the fact that they're actually being invaded. I don't even think they realize it. I don't think they want to realize it. I think it's all part of an agenda that they're working to. They've got more problems on their own doorstep than other countries. I mean, if you're gonna look at it that way, we should be a world leader from New Zealand, because we don't have that sort of thing going on. We could go out there and start making some demands and that. But the reality is no. I mean, I don't believe that France is up there. I don't believe they've actually got anything to offer. And they need to sort out their mess first. But he seems absolutely intent on imposing himself on everything. And he seems to have the support to do it, which is why I say it's part of an agenda. And yeah, I think that this move now to recognize a Palestinian state is really going to be the nail in the coffin for France, because that's going to come back and bite them.
Yeah.
Davey, over to you real quick. I mean, this is kind of like if Albanese were to inject himself into Chinese political machinations. I think China should be easier on the Uyghurs. I mean, that is the state of disconnect I think France has. Like, right. Albanese would say that, but what would China do? They would laugh at him.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting. Look, I did watch our mainstream news last night just because I was an idiot. No, I guess I just wanted to see how they were going to present things, I guess. But yeah, look, we got the media spin doctors here, and look, they presented the Emmanuel Macron coming out and saying he's going to recognise the Palestinian state on September 1st. They were putting it forward as a good thing. They played this right after Anthony Albanese's anti-Israel speech too. So my fears after watching that was, okay, they're pushing Macron, saying this as a good thing. How long before Albo does the same thing? It's political gesturing. It's kind of like the media spin doctors are behind a lot of this too. when you were talking before that, Jacob, though, I couldn't help but think of Revelation 21:8, where it says, "But for the cowardly and unbelieving and abominable and murderers and immoral persons and sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their part will be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death." I've always found it interesting, you know, the first thing on the list is the cowardly, and Macron fits that perfectly. So does Albanese. Albo went over to China recently, seeing you brought it up, Jay, but all he did was, he was just pandering to the government. He was licking their boots, He did nothing. He came back and, he achieved a lot of great accomplishment. It was, great accomplishment for China. China, for, benefits nothing for us, but these are the kind of leaders we've got. But the more I look at these kind of leaders like Macron, Elbow, and all the rest of it, I believe these leaders are judgments on us. But when you look at them and look at what they stand for, the policies they're pushing, I can't help but think of passages like Psalm 2 and all the rest of it, where the kings of the earth set their face against the Lord and all the rest of it. It's almost like they're deliberately coming against the Lord now. It's kind of like every policy they come across or come up with is anti-Christian to the core. I'm wondering now, are we moving from them just being plain idiots to, is there kind of like a spiritual dimension to this? Are they becoming like spiritually controlled and manipulated? Because it's almost like they're setting their face against the Lord, that they're coming against the Lord. And you see it with a number of world leaders now. It's kind of like, it's almost like they're at war with God.
Yes. Jacob, we see that the U.S. is strongly rejecting the French plan to recognize Palestine, but out of one side of their face, they're correct in doing that. But on the other hand, let's talk a little bit about Qatar. Let's talk about the Muslim Brotherhood. Let's talk about Al Jazeera and a Trump associate, a very close Trump associate, doing business with them.
That happened in 2018, I think, or 13 or 18. It was not recent, but it was a $623 million buyout, the Park Lane Hotel in Central Park, south of Manhattan. I know exactly where it is. It's next to the Barbican. It's near the Plaza Hotel. A very, very salubrious stretch of real estate in New York City, right across the street from Central Park. He did business with these people. Qatar funds Al Jazeera, which is basically the media relations branch of radical Islam. He funds the Qatar were funding and hosting the three senior leaders of Hamas, who stole $11 billion of international aid from their own people and kept them in Qatar. This is Qatar. Qatar is the biggest funder of American universities, especially Georgetown, the Jesuit school in Washington, D.C., and it is one of the three main schools where the State Department and CIA have diplomats and intelligence analysts recruited from the School of International Affairs. This is Qatar. They have professors who are anti-Israel, who are anti-American, who are pro-Sharia, and the American government lets this happen. Now, this certainly happened with Bush. The Saudi Arabian government had the Bush administration in their back pocket. They had Bush and Cheney in their back pocket. America was sold down the river by the Bush administration after September 11th, by Bush and Cheney. There's no question about it. But I am a bit troubled about Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump did some business deals with the Qataris. What I think he's trying to do is give them a financial inducement to amend their policies. He got the Qataris to tell the leaders of Hamas, that they could no longer use Qatar for a base anymore. So Hamas had to leave Qatar. They had to get out of there. That was, again, pressure from Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump wanted to give them business deals with the United States that would give them a financial incentive to stop doing some of the things they're doing. He's making a mistake, at least in part, this being the reason. The government of Qatar cannot be trusted as far as you can spit. They all have an ideological allegiance to the Muslim Brotherhood. The same Muslim Brotherhood responsible for the assassination of Anwar Sadat, and the same Muslim Brotherhood that controls Hamas. Hamas is simply the military arm of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Palestinian so-called branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. It goes beyond that. It goes to the Council of American Islamic Relations, CAIR, an organization that needs to be investigated by Congress and disbanded. After September 11th, the FBI and Justice Department cited 3 cases of its leadership being involved with terrorist-linked organizations. Bush didn't care. Bush did not care about America. It's just Bush. You know, you're talking about a political prostitute on steroids with no scruples and no mark. He just did what he did because he's Bush and Cheney. That's what they are. They're as bad as any liberal Democrat. The Saudi Arabians had them in their pocket. All he cared about was getting the Saudi Arabians protected and getting them out of America and suppressing the 28 pages of evidence that the Saudi Arabians funded Al-Qaeda. And then most of the terrorists were Saudi Arabian. This was Bush. I always say the first target the United States should have taken out on September 11th was the Bush Ranch. That was the first thing we should have bombed, was the Bush Ranch in Texas. Just evil people. I just despised the Bush political dynasty. But they just pandered and let these people in. He gave speeches for CAIR, going around saying how Islam was a religion of peace in the aftermath of September 11th. Can you imagine Roosevelt, even, who was a liberal, going around giving speeches after Pearl Harbor, saying that emperor worship and Shintoism are a religion of peace after Pearl Harbor? Well, that's what Bush did. That's how wicked he is, and how wicked the mainstream Republican Party, the rhinos, are. It's a horrible situation. Mr. Trump was an improvement, but he needs to be careful. You cannot trust Qatar. They are Muslim Brotherhood. They killed Sadat for making peace with Israel. They are Hamas. They are linked to CAIR, or have been, according to the Justice Department. They are dangerous. Mr. Witkoff did business with them. As a Jew, as a New York Jew, he did business with them. You know, green talks. Money talks.
Always does.
In Mr. Trump's thinking, you can do business deals to get what you want politically. Okay, he did get the Hamas leadership out of Qatar. But he's not going to get the Muslim Brotherhood out of Qatar. They need to be stopped from funding American universities. There's also an American Air Force base in Qatar. Yet, at the same time, because they share what may be the biggest natural gas field in the world underneath the Persian Gulf with Iran, they're in bed with Iran. Qatar will get in bed with anybody as long as it's green, as long as it's about money. Iran, Hamas, United States, anybody. They'll do business with anybody. But their absolute sacrosanct conviction is the Muslim Brotherhood. They cannot be trusted.
You know, we're going to turn our attention kind of to continue with politics in the United States. The political bombshell went off this week. Tulsi Gabbard is making allegations that trigger basically a higher wire act from the administration. It had John Brennan saying that she's basically lying, but she's exposing that the intel report that was used to go after Donald Trump to impeach him was done by the intelligence agency and signed off by Obama. But
yes.
Can you comment a little bit on that, Jacob?
And let's remember, these would be among the same 51 so-called intelligence analysts who gave the false statement about Hunter Biden's laptop coming from Russia. Same one, same crowd of corruption. This has to do with the Clintons, Hillary Clinton certainly in her campaign. It had to do with Obama. The Clinton campaign paid for the Steele dossier. Why was she not indicted? Why? When Biden took documentation that was classified and put it in a garage in Delaware, the prosecutor said he doesn't want to go for any kind of a prosecution because Biden is not compos mentis enough to stand trial. While he was president, Hillary Clinton had the same thing in her house in New York. She did the same thing in her house, in a closet. No arrest, no indictment. Yet they did Mar-a-Lago. This is a corrupt, out-of-control machine. It is an unelected branch of government. It is not democratically accountable. It is not even accountable to the public or the media beyond the limited point. They can just claim national security and use that as a mechanism to protect themselves from any investigation. Clapper lied before Congress. Certainly, Brennan needs to die in prison. Certainly, Comey needs to die in prison. McCabe needs to be indicted. Strzok needs to die in prison. Page needs to die in prison. They orchestrated an attack on democracy itself. They lied. They pursued hostile, baseless prosecutions for political reasons. They tried to censor the free expression of information going to Silicon Valley and trying to control what can be put on social media. And all at the taxpayer's expense. Men like Brennan, men like Comey, men like Clapper, men like McCabe, they belong in jail. Certainly Strzok, and Page, they belong in jail. I believe they belong in jail. But so do their political mentors. They are the stooges. They are the vassals. The real string pullers are the Clintons, Biden, and Obama, the powers that be. Donald Trump has stated that the Supreme Court's decision granting him presidential immunity from a bogus prosecution will help shield Barack Obama from a legitimate one and give Barack Obama immunity. But there's no question as to his guilt. Because of the $150 billion he put into the pockets of Iran to fund Iranian terror and development of nuclear weapons, I think Barack Obama was a traitor anyway. He should be tried for treason on that basis alone. I don't think it's likely he will be indicted or tried for treason on this basis. It is not likely. Hopefully, however, Brennan and Comey can be brought to justice. It is my ambition to see Clapper and Hillary Clinton brought to justice. Well, they must be brought to justice if there is a such thing as justice. But of course, in Washington, there isn't.
I'd like to go to Pierre, actually. You are, again, an outsider, especially to American politics. But I have to ask you, from an outsider looking in, the whole Trump, Russia, you must have heard it on the media 1,000 times as we did over where you were during
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a big topic then, and it's a big topic now, with what's come out. I find it interesting, though, that in American politics, what we've seen over the last couple of years is firsts. You had this first time that they're going after an ex-president in what they did with Trump, to the extent that they were to try and get him locked up. And it was something that you didn't really see in the past. But also with this, there was a lot of feeling down here that at the time, all these claims against his links with Russia and that were actually not him, but the opposition. And now this is all coming out. It's really interesting. And I think what it does for those of us who are on the outside looking in, you just kind of see it as another corrupt sort of environment of politics. And it's, you'll always have two camps. You'll have the people who will be pro-Trump and say, yes, he's the guy who's standing up against all of this nonsense that these other people are involved in. Let's call it the sort of establishment leaders, the ones that are selected and all have the good handshake and they all come through the right channels. And then you've got those who sort of stand against him and support that side of the political realm. What I find fascinating is it doesn't matter where you are in the world, American politics is always high up on the agenda. The rest of the world looks at America and kind of goes, we have a major interest in what's going on over there because it impacts all of us in the long run, one way or another. Sometimes that's economically, other times it causes other political issues in places. But I suppose this whole thing with Russia and that, there's this real feel that he was aligned with Russia's so bad, and now this is coming out. And I think the fact that there were so many people who supported Obama, particularly down here in New Zealand, this is going to be a hard pill for them to swallow, that he was involved in things like this. I think they're going to go, oh, it's just lies, because as soon as they hear something they don't like or it goes against the narrative, then it doesn't really exist. It didn't really happen. So, you're going to always have those people that are going to be willfully blinded. But it is an interesting one, this, and I'm keen to see how this one plays out.
Davey, I'm going to put you on the hot seat real quick. So Graham and Cornyn in the Senate have called for a special counsel to investigate the Obama administration's Russian intel scandal. Do you think that any convictions will actually happen?
To be honest, look, I don't think. I hope we do see some convictions, because if we don't have some convictions come, it's kind of like things are only going to get worse and worse. There does need to be some accountability for this. Because, look, I did hear one person describe, this makes Watergate look like a tea party, and they're right. There had to be consequences for the Watergate thing. Back when the Watergate scandal happened, look, there was public outrage. Now there's kind of like public apathy. I think that shows a change in this, in our world nowadays. So that's concerning. But the corruption everywhere in our governments is only going to thrive more and more unless there is kind of accountability for this. Do I think it'll go as far as touching Obama? No, I actually do think. Look, they'll have to throw a few scapegoats out there. They'll probably throw. Let me see.
Our secretary.
Yeah, or Brendan under the bus, or so they'll throw someone under the bus. They'll throw a couple of people under the bus too, kind of but will there be
sacrificial lambs?
Yes, yeah, but I don't think there'll be a full accountability. I think we're getting to the times. In Jesus' day there was more corruption, governmental corruption. galore. You know, if you look at the dynasty of the Herods and all the rest of it, the moral corruption, depravity, and the political skullduggery. I think we're seeing a rise in that again today. So I don't expect. Hopefully, I'm proven wrong. Hopefully, I'm proven wrong. I would love to see them all brought to justice, but I think the Obamas and the Clintons, they'll be back to see another day, unfortunately.
You know, Pierre made a simple comment that American politics is even spoken about in New Zealand. It's spoken about around the world. I think what we're seeing is, as Rome, the Senate and people of Rome and their politics, the Caesars, were talked about around the world. The Senate and the people of America are also talked about around the world because they are the world power at the moment. At the moment. Yeah. Something else, since we're on the subject of Barack Obama, just a little tangent real quickly. Here's a statement from Barack Obama himself, and I'll have the panel comment that one of these things that I think a lot of time boys need is not just exposure to one guy, one dad. No matter how good the dad is, he can't be everything, Obama said. And then the boy may need somebody to give the boy some perspective on the dad. Now, he was speaking on his wife's podcast, and he believes that every boy needs a homosexual man in their life to give them perspective.
Well,
you take it away anytime.
Okay, I'll go to comment on this one because it's kind of like, okay, Obama needs to go and tell that to all the parents of the children who were sexually abused by the childcare sex offender here recently. He abused, I think it was like over 70 children. The youngest, I think, was as 5 months old, where he, you know, because yeah, he was a homosexual. Yeah, he was a furry, all the rest of it. No, that's another thing here. They won't actually address that issue. We had a similar situation come out just a couple of days later at another childcare thing. Again, the guy was, you know, bent. I don't know how I can say it nicely. But yeah, Obama needs to go and say that to all those parents. It was wonderful those children had a homosexual man in their lives, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, what Obama's doing there is basically showing the world who he really is. And that's something that we all need to remember. These people are evil. You know, when you kind of look at what they stand for, what they're all about, he's pretty much told the world what he stands for in that brief quote, and it should be shocking for everyone. Sadly, it won't be. He'll be lauded by the woke left, and you know, sort of people will be jumping on the bandwagon, going, "Yes, you know, this is exactly the right way to look at the world." But we know from a Christian point of view what camp they're in, and it's just been affirmed if anyone had any doubts.
Jacob,
I've got to quickly go there. Jay. It's just kind of like, I wonder if the homosexual man in Barack Obama's life happens to have the initials MO. Leave it at that.
Now, Jacob, I mean, is Obama really saying anything that we haven't, you know, said before? Especially the Catholic Church, they seem to want a gay man in young boys' lives all the time.
Well, obviously, but Obama is a liar and a hypocrite. When he was first presenting himself with aspirations of the presidency, he affirmed marriage between one man and one woman. Then when the Supreme Court, the corrupt Supreme Court, with the backing of Republican members, voted to impose same-sex marriage unconstitutionally, he lit up the White House in the colors of the homosexual flag to celebrate it. I'm not surprised he wants grooming of underage boys for homosexual exploitation. I'd expect it of him.
Yes.
What wouldn't you expect from him? He went to the church of Jeremiah Wright that had Farrakhan speaking in it. Can you imagine what would have happened if Donald Trump or somebody went to a segregated white church that had David Duke speaking in it? There's always two standards. Barack Obama has no scruples and no morals of any kind whatsoever. He's a political liar. But what needs to happen is an investigation. Did he make applications for scholarships as a foreign student to Harvard University and Columbia? Did he make those applications? If over the age of 18, he made applications to American institutions of higher learning for grants and scholarships as a foreigner, he admitted that he relinquished his American citizenship and his presidency was illegal and unconstitutional, for which the Supreme Court would have to make him a non-president, would have to retract anything he signed into law, and he could be prosecuted state by state for election fraud, which he should be. I would love to see that investigation take place. I've always been skeptical about the birther thing. Is it right or wrong? I don't know. I don't know if he's an American by birth. His grandmother said he wasn't, but I don't know. What I do know is there should be an investigation to see if he relinquished his American citizenship coming from Indonesia to the United States, if he came as a foreign student and made those applications. I wish him nothing but bad. I pray the judgment of God be upon him.
All right. Well, we'll conclude that section and move on to our next. Let's talk a little bit about tech and AI for the moment. Sam Altman, the lead and the head of OpenAI, warns the financial sector that artificial intelligence is about to unleash significant fraud in the financial markets. He's calling it a crisis. AI and a fraud crisis. We already have a delicate worldwide economy. If AI is leveraged to do fraud, what can this mean for the world economy? And what does that mean for the rest?
Let's remember, after 2008, Obama declined to prosecute anybody responsible for the subprime lending. Of course, he would have had to indict himself. He was one of the people in the Senate, him and Chris Dodd, most responsible for the 2008 happening. But they didn't prosecute anybody. They didn't prosecute anybody. What would happen in a scenario where there was nobody to prosecute because you can say that the AI did it? We came not close, but remotely close during the Reagan administration, that Black Friday, when selling orders were issued by computers. You had computers doing market analysis of the main stock exchanges in the world, and they began issuing selling orders, and the market crashed during the Reagan administration. There was allegations there was some Russian influence in it. Be that as it may, that was then. And look what happened. Can you imagine what would happen now? But there would be nobody to indict. There'd be nobody to indict. You can say the AI did it. We didn't intend the AI to do this. It did it on its own.
Perfect Patsy. Perfect Patsy. Any comments, Pierre, on AI being leveraged for fraud, as if fraud needed any help?
Yeah, precisely. It's rampant out there already. We don't need AI doing that. You mentioned about the delicate nature of the world economy at the moment, and I think that's the biggest concern, because there's a number of countries, and we're one of them. I mean, we're in a recession. I saw the other day that Australia was basically slipping into a recession. We can't afford any more problems. And if you're having AI committing fraud on a wide scale, it could actually destabilize countries. And that could open up all sorts of avenues. And you start looking at things like wars as a result, because that's kind of how countries correct those issues. So yeah, it's not the most exciting news. It's one that is very concerning.
Well, thank you for that wonderful setup for that segue. Let's go ahead and talk about it. China, Russia, economies are in danger. If the AI fraud crisis on the financial markets were to affect the economy of the world, what does this mean, Jacob, for countries like Russia and China who have traditionally used military action to help a struggling economy?
Let's begin with Russia. Putin has depleted the foreign currency reserves to a dangerous point now. He's selling oil, but at a much lower rate. And there's newer sanctions going to come. Where is he going to get the money? Not just to continue the war, but to keep Russia functionally solvent. Russia is heading to an economic collapse, a virtual collapse of the Russian economy. That is what happened when the Iron Curtain imploded. The Iron Curtain imploded as a result of economic collapse. They played the war machine card as long as they could, but then what happens when the economy goes? Putin has painted himself into a corner, and he has no way out. He has no way out of that corner. Everything he wanted has backfired. He wanted Ukraine out of NATO. Well, so did most NATO countries. They didn't want the Ukraine because they knew it was corrupt. People know that Zelensky's corrupt. There were people in Kiev last week protesting in the streets of Kiev against Zelensky's corruption. Putin could have easily kept the Ukraine out of NATO. Now he's created the impetus to bring Ukraine into NATO, which would be less likely to have happened if he didn't invade it. Not only that, he created another 740 miles of border with NATO by bringing Finland, backed by Sweden, into NATO. His ambitions of stopping NATO expansion eastward blew up in his face and backfired. What he's done to his economy, having to get drones from Iran and mercenaries from North Korea. It is a mess, and he has no way out unless he loses face. Then there's China. The private debt, the corporate debt. And remember, in China, when we say corporate, we don't just mean private sector. We mean state-owned enterprises. The debt of local and regional government, and the national debt. America has an economy that is at least $10 trillion larger than China's. The United States has an economy that is at least $10 trillion larger than China's. China's in second place. America's debt is $37 billion, approximately. China's is twice that, with an economy that's $10 trillion smaller. Ping is in trouble. You've got unemployment, you've got youth, you've got a demographic crisis with an aging population. China has no way out. The fear, of course, is that they will resort to some kind of militarism. because they have no economic way out of the mess they've gotten themselves into. And the Trump tariffs are now being joined by Europe. They have no way out. Let's also not forget Japan. Yeah, Mr. Trump made this big deal with Japan. But Japan's deficit of debt is 200% plus of GDP.
Yes.
Singapore, the gem of the East, has a larger per capita debt and percentage of GDP debt than the United States by far. Asia is not what we've been told Asia was. Asia is a powder keg, not about to explode, but about to implode. I'm not talking about what happened to the tiger economies 12, 15 years ago, when Malaysia and these countries all got in trouble. We're talking well beyond that. Something worse. Something considerably worse. What are they going to do? They have no way out of it. You can only kick a can down a road for so long. What happens when you run out of road? Now, the United States is doing that too. Europe is doing that too. But they have a longer stretch of road. China and Russia do not. Something has to give. When you have that kind of an economic impending, not just crisis, not just mega crisis, a catastrophe, it has to have social and political ramifications. That can easily lead to strategic ramifications. These little wars are springing up. Now, this week, it was Cambodia with Thailand. Wars and rumors of wars is exactly what Jesus said. It's going to be all over the place. There's going to be no stopping it. It's not just Gaza or the Middle East. It's not. It's going to be all over. But watch the big ones. Watch Russia and watch China.
Another story that I wanted to go over in technology real quick, something that's quite disturbing. They have now developed a way to use an embryo, giving it 3 parents. So you have your surrogate, and then you have 2 other parents, and my mind immediately goes to 2 same-sex parents who want to include their genetic DNA into this one embryo. This is undoing what God has already done. This is man becoming God, trying to outdo God to fulfill basically a designer baby for liberal causes.
Let's understand something. When the Nephilim came down and began procreating with human women, it was a demonic corruption, an attempted demonic corruption of the human genome. What we are seeing is the same thing.
100% I would agree with you. This goes beyond the pale.
The last time God had to intervene when the human genome was being corrupted by demonic influence. It's happening now. The Lord is coming soon.
Yeah. No, I think this all ties into with the fact that they're making merchandise out of children and that kind of thing too. It's kind of like there's money to be made in this too. It's kind of, they could just, there's other options for people to get a baby. This is because it's going to bring in big money, and I wonder how long it'll be before they'll start doing the celebrity thing. Where you can have certain traits from certain celebrities incorporated into your baby design and all the rest of it.
Absolutely, but the thing, what stands out most in my mind is this: Until now, homosexuals could not have children. Lesbians could not have children. So they wanted somebody else's. They wanted the right to adopt, which Tony Blair gave them in England and other such wicked people who will give account on the day of judgment. What is going to happen where, through the misuse of biogenetic engineering, two men are going to say, this baby has our DNA. Two women are going to say, this baby has both of our DNA. It's as much ours as your baby is yours. God cannot allow that to happen. The Lord has to come soon.
Amen.
Amen.
Just to be clear, just a correction from our chat room. It's 99% two parents, 99.99% two parents, and 0.1% of the third parent. So it's still factoring in 3 genetic codes, which again, that kind of goes down the same rabbit hole of Shiro Ishii, Dr. Mangala, just experiments you don't really want to do.
Yes.
Now, I had a great segue that I did not take advantage of. The aspect of designing a child, monetizing children, making them fashionable, merchandisable, the commerce section of it. In other news, Australia government has decided to incentivize the abortion of children, offering $4,000 if you abort your child. Now, I'll go to Davey first, but I want to go to Davey and Pierre first. Why would people want to incentivize the killing of children? Go ahead, Davey.
Oh, sorry, I was muted too. Yeah, I know this was happening in South Australia. It's kind of like, well, again, I know it's the anti-God policies and all the rest of it. I really feel for any believer Christian who is in the medical profession, because it is getting harder and harder for them to be there. It takes me back in some ways 25 years ago. The government always do these bonuses and all the rest of it, but 25 years ago, there was an incentive, a baby bonus thing. So they were trying to incentivize couples to have babies. So it got nicknamed around town, the plasma bonus, the plasma TV bonus, because a lot of people were just having the baby to get the bonus so they could buy their new plasma TV set. But this is kind of like, over $4,000 basically to have your baby aborted, and we're talking late term abortion here. And and you've got women bragging about it. I aborted my baby, and now I'm using the money to go to a trip to Bali and that kind of thing. So the depravity is unbelievable. But there is money in this. I could speculate a little bit with why.
4,000 is not an insignificant sum of money to someone.
Can you imagine women getting pregnant so they can abort the baby and go on vacation to Bali?
I mean, that is a vacation, and you can get it 4,000 a year for basically what, 20 years? That's a lot of money if somebody wanted to capitalize on the death of children.
Absolutely. I mean, I saw a headline the other day out of the UK. There was a pop artist there, Lily Allen, I think is her name, who was saying how she has lost track of how many abortions she's had. Now, if you think about that, you take that and you have a whole group of young women who are being enabled to have promiscuous lifestyles, but are continually cashing in on falling pregnant and having late-term abortions. It does bring up a few questions about, are we baby farming for particular uses? And you mentioned earlier, Jay, before we came on, that possibly the selling of baby parts, which I think you'd have to look at when you kind of look at something like this. But I just wanted to give you some stats. They reckon that 82% of late-term abortions in South Australia are being performed on healthy babies. That's outrageous, okay?
Healthy babies.
Healthy babies, yeah. Which means that, initially they always had these things that if there were problems with the babies, you could abort.
Yes.
But now this is 82%. In Victoria, where Davey is, it's even higher. It goes up to 85%. But then I also want to point out that back in 2021, when we had that judgment on us called Jacinda Ardern, she brought in against the what the public wanted. The public strongly opposed her bringing in this late-term abortion law, okay, and it was one of the most horrendous in the world. But it showed at the time that there were only about 2% of women that supported that abortion law. The majority didn't want it. She brought it in and she enforced it. What happened was that there was a 43% increase in abortions on late-term babies, okay? That's kind of what starts happening, because the people who were voting and being opposed to this were obviously of an older group, not the younger generation that was coming through. But for the younger women, and we see it here in New Zealand, and I'm sure you see it in your countries as well. You could almost have that, a show going out there, women behaving badly, because the promiscuous behavior that goes on and in public is really bad. And the attitude of young women these days, and I've spoken to a number of them about, abortion and that, and the attitude is very much one of, it's just a tool, it's there so that I can live this life, and I have the opportunity to remove the baby because I don't want it. To be now paid to do that, they're gonna wait for that late term option, because that's what is being required by the people that are imposing this opportunity. So you have to question: is this a business that they're running?
Yeah.
Now, this is completely hypothetical, because we all know it's very illegal for body parts to be sold around the world, but this is completely hypothetical. Here is the price catalog for each baby part of aborted children, okay? And this is from 2020. For an intact fetal liver, $500 to $2,000. For brain tissue, $1,000 to $2,500. A pancreas, $500 to $1,500. For an eye, $500 to $1,200 each. Each limb with muscle samples, $300 to $700. For a umbilical cord, $400 to $800. And finally, stem cells, $1,000 to $5,000. So I'm going to do some quick math and say that if you sold every single part of a child, you're looking at roughly about $20,000 a child for a $4,000 investment. If it were all about giving $4,000 incentive to a woman to sell her aborted fetus.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I know the baby body part trading goes on big time in China and that too. And it's interesting. Our government is really cozy with the Chinese at the moment too. But that 4,000, I got the exact amount, $4,325. It's taxpayer funded money too. So it's
Correct.
the taxpayer who is paying that to the women.
And the taxpayer will never see any profit from the body parts when they're sold, if they're ever sold. Just to be clear.
Yeah.
All right. I think we've beaten that horrible demonic subject to death. We all know that abortion is just Baal worship in disguise. Let's move on to the church and Christian issues. Let's talk about celebrity Christianity. We had two, according to some, very famous Christians die. Let's start with the not so obvious one. Being lauded as a devout Anglican that prayed before every concert. Ozzy Osbourne went to meet his Lord, a Lord, something. I don't know, and I'm not going to go either way with that. But it's interesting to me, Davey. You and I were talking about this. Ozzy struck me as a person where I looked for fruits. There are people that said that he was given the gospel many times, but I didn't see any repentance. I saw someone doubling down on their lifestyle.
Yeah, well, look, I was actually shocked when we did the pre-show this morning. It was the first time I actually heard that he was a Christian. I was kind of like, yeah, I thought, you're kidding me? I don't know much about Ozzy Osbourne, but the only thing I do remember him for is that song he did, a tribute song to Aleister Crowley, who was basically, well, he was a Satanist and an abuser of kids and a lot of other things. So, yeah, I was kind of stunned, and I'm still a little stunned that, yeah, I'm with you, Jay. I never saw any sort of fruits of repentance or that kind of thing there. There was nothing that would ever kind of even make me think that he was even remotely, Christian,
Yeah, he said he revealed that he believed in God about a couple weeks before he died, right before his final farewell show. Now, can that happen? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the farewell show, I'm wondering, did he cover Aleister Crowley? Did he cover War Pigs? Did he do the catalog that made him famous and rich? Or did he do a catalog that maybe magnified something else?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I've got no idea, but it would be interesting to kind of look at.
Jacob, any comment on Ozzy's farewell and the idea that he was a devout Anglican, which I think is kind of funny because I don't count Anglicans as Christian.
What's interesting is his wife is half Jewish. She's an Australian, half Irish, half Jewish. And she practiced Judaism. That was the main family religion, not Anglicanism, because of her influence. I've heard him speak about God, and he said he was not a Satanist. But in the early days of Black Sabbath, they were banned from Birmingham, England, the English Midlands. They used that imagery for marketing purposes and shock value to get a following. Their early songs like Iron Man and things like this, they were a heavy metal sound, but a lot of them had very dark imagery. And one of their album covers was plainly demonic. They definitely used satanic and demonic imagery, perhaps only for shock value. But they used it. Even toying around with it is a bad thing. Now, I have, just out of curiosity, I listened to one of his songs, and the song was about his mother or something, and it had some lyrical depth to it. It did not have satanic imagery or anything like this. I only once heard him talk about God, and he said he believed in God, and he said God was a good person, as he put it, and that he's not a Satanist. But they used that imagery. That imagery was used by the band for marketing purposes. Definitely was. Having said that, the most shocking, well, we had the thing that took place at the Super Bowl that time, didn't we? And also at the Olympic Games in not the Olympic Games, the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham with the satanic imagery. That was quite frightening. That may have been the absolute worst. But it was Sympathy for the Devil by the Rolling Stones. The lyrics of that song are actually accurate. They're theologically accurate about Satan. Saying to have sympathy for the devil. So the Rolling Stones pioneered that thing. It was not him. It was not Black Sabbath. He was kicked out of Black Sabbath for substance abuse, which was strange because the others were abusing the same substances by all accounts. Then there was a person named Dio, who again used the same kind of imagery.
Yes.
Page moved into Aleister Crowley's mansion. Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin bought Aleister Crowley's house and by some accounts, by occult means, was advised to buy the paintings of M.C. Escher shortly before M.C. Escher died, which multiplied the value of the paintings that Jimmy Page bought. So Ozzy Osbourne was by far not the only one who was into this kind of imagery and that particular industry. I don't know. I don't know. I just hope by the mercy of God somehow he believed, but I have no indication that he did.
Let's move on to another celebrity, another one that is definitely being called a Christian, which I don't know, but Hulk Hogan is being thrust to the forefront because he was very active in his church, which I haven't ever looked into his church, but it seemed like your classic mega church down in Florida that he was involved in.
Yeah,
Yeah. So again, I'm both with Ozzy and now with Hulk Hogan. I'm seeing in Christianity there's a tendency, basically, that we need to make sure, since the world knows these people, we need to make sure that we elevate them as Christians. I think that's a very dangerous thing to do. I think we've seen with Justin Bieber, with some of the other celebrity Christianity converts, what eventually happens is they go to Catholicism in many cases.
yes. Look, I don't pay attention to much of that stuff. I think it's nonsense and not worth the time. The juice is not worth the squeeze. It's just not worth it. Not worth it at all. But I do have more hope for Hulk Hogan. He may have become a believer. It's interesting. He also was a supporter, endorser of Donald Trump.
He was.
So a lot of liberals are going to be glad he's gone. But I, I don't judge him. But I of course hope he did become a believer. But there's at least some basis to hope that he is with the Lord. What is also impressive, I find, is that he was a professional athlete who died at the age of 71. That is a rather young age to give up the ghost at this present time in history with the medical science being in the state it's in. He died kind of young for a professional athlete. When I see professional athletes who keep themselves fit professionally, the exercise and healthy living and nutrition and training is supposedly everything to them, and they die young. This shows me that God is the one who no man has control over the day of death or power to retain the spirit. Arthur Ashe, who was one of the greatest tennis players of all time, and he was the first Black American to become a very top tennis player, maybe the top in the world at the time. He died young, extremely fit. There was a jogger in Central Park who jogged all the time and dropped dead as a young person. When professional athletes who live a regimented life of fitness, of nutrition and health, with professional trainers, sports medicine, and the rest of it, keel over and die before their time, for want of a better way to put it. They die. He was younger than me, and he's gone. No man has control over the day of death or power to retain the spirit. My friend Clem Bazewski, as I know him, who I grew up with, the drummer of Blondie, he stopped taking drugs. He stopped taking cigarettes. He stopped drinking alcohol. He became a fitness freak, going to the gym. He wanted to be a rock and roll survivor. He was determined he was going to be like Keith Richards or somebody, or Bob Dylan into his 80s, still rocking. He didn't make it past the age of 70, despite the fact that he became a fitness freak. No man has control over the day of death or power to retain the spirit. This is not to discourage healthy living, good nutrition, and proper exercise, but it's ultimately the Lord who's going to determine how long we have. The important thing is Work out your salvation in fear and trembling.
Trembling.
Every day somebody lives. Every morning they wake up with the breath of life. Every day is God giving them a chance to get saved. And it's God giving a Christian the chance to get sanctified. Every day. That's the mindset that we ought to have when we look upon the death of these celebrities.
All right, with that, this is the end of this portion of the program. We will have Backstage. We're going to go there just in a few minutes. So for those of you on YouTube now and Rumble and X, please join us there. RTN will obviously be there. Telegram will obviously be there. Facebook, if you're watching there, please move to the other channel. We will see you in a few minutes.
Can I just, James, before we go, make two very brief prayer requests?
Please do, Jacob.
There is a nurse in Great Britain, a young black woman, lost her job because of her position on only accepting male and female. She's a believer and she's being persecuted and fired. She needs prayer. Pray for her and for her legal appeal. It's a terrible situation, what's happening to this young woman. Again, she's a black British woman, but a dedicated Christian. There is in East Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a pastor who has a secular job in a library. But he pastors a church. He refused to call a female employee a male. He said his faith does not allow him to cross-identify people outside of their natural-born gender. They made a DEI complaint about him, and he's been fired, and he's suing. Please pray for God's justice in both of these cases, in Louisiana and in England. Also, Senator Ted Cruz is proposing a legislation that would designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. Congress needs to act on this. So does the administration, but Congress does. Please pray for the believers in Congress, including Senator Cruz, and please pray that this legislation goes forward. The Muslim Brotherhood is dangerous, and it should have no place in American business, culture, politics, or academia, and it does.
Thank you, Jacob. And we will be definitely praying for those people, the pastor and the young nurse. Now, if without further ado, we will be going to Backstage. God bless. Hi, and welcome to Backstage, where we decide to put Jacob on the hot seat and try to stump him. We have a ton of questions. Hopefully, we'll get to as many as we can. But unfortunately, if your question does not get asked this week, we will, of course, push that to next week. Jacob, you ready?
I'm ready, sir.
All right, here we go. Question number 1. How do I reconcile God delaying his return because he wishes that none will perish, then the great apostasy coming, where many will fall away?
God is a God who desires the salvation of all, but he is not a God who imposes it. The Calvinistic doctrine of predestination, that he makes some to go to heaven and they have no choice, and others to go to hell and they have no choice, is not scriptural. It is something founded in Islamic thought, philosophically, in Ja'ala, but that kind of determinism is not biblical. He does delay in the hope that more will repent and be saved, but he does so despite the fact that he knows many are going to fall away. God will go to great lengths to save the few who will repent and believe. God told the prophets like Jeremiah and Ezekiel, the people are not going to listen to you. Tell them anyway. One of the reasons he did that was not just to bring an indictment, cementing his judgment, but for the sake of the few who would listen and repent. Tell many for the sake of the few. Many are called, few are chosen. Cast the nets, throw the bad fish back. It's always been like that. God will go and extend his grace to everyone for the sake of those who will respond to it, even though most will not. Also, there is another issue. The apostasy is not people rejecting the gospel, okay? He tarries that more people will be saved. The apostasy is people who profess to have accepted the gospel falling away. So you're conflating two different things. He tarries that more will be saved. But the apostasy is not about more being saved. It's about those who profess to have been saved falling away and departing from the truth. Okay?
Great answer, Jacob. Next question we have. Out of curiosity, does Jacob have some teachers that he would recommend to a student who would desire to understand or learn the hermeneutics of the Apostolic Church?
Yes, but they're largely academics. They're largely academics. My first advice to somebody wanting to learn the hermeneutics of the early church is to try to get a grip on Greek and Hebrew. Try to get a grip on Greek and Hebrew. The Septuagint, the Hebrew scriptures, and the New Testament. Try to get a grip on becoming literate and a basic understanding of grammar and syntax and vocabulary in the original languages. You cannot use lexical commentaries unless you have a basic knowledge of those languages. So it's like, how can I become an engineer? Well, make sure you're good at math, first of all. You know what I'm saying? Get the tools of it. And one of the tools is to get some kind of a functional competency in the original languages. Secondly, if you're going to go down the academic route, begin reading people like R.N. Longenecker, Richard Longenecker, or David Daube, D-A-U-B-E. Read those people, but realize they're writing in an academic format. Their books are published in a scholarly style with footnotes and endnotes and technical language. There is no book going to tell you how to. It's only going to be a book that tells you this is how the early Christians did it and how that stands in contrast to later methods of exegesis, which largely come from 16th century humanism, at least among conservatives and Protestants and evangelicals and so forth. Now, there have been some good Bible teachers and expositors who did, to varying degrees, understand the way the early Christians handled the texts. One person who was over 100 years ahead of his time was A.W. Pink. Now, he was a moderate Calvinist. There were other things about him, but towards the end of his life, the more he went on, the better he got. A.W. Pink understood as well as anybody how the early Christians read the scriptures. Arthur Pink, read him. You can get his books. You can even get them online. The early brethren with their emphasis on temple typology, that shows you how the early Christians thought about certain things. Additionally, there's the Messianic scholars, those who understood how Christianity came from the Jewish thought of the Second Temple period. There are later ones like Arnold Fruchtenbaum, but the first ones are people like David Barron, Franz Delitzsch. These are believing Jews of the 19th century And Alfred Edersheim is another. Alfred Edersheim, Franz Delitzsch, David Barron. Read those early Messianic Jewish scholars. Okay? Now that is a nutshell. But when you do read them, you're going to go to their glossaries in their books, and you're going to find other sources they quote. But that's where I would say you should begin. But if you don't have something of a handle on the original languages, you're not going to be able to get very far.
Thank you, Jacob. What does the phrase "a mighty hunter before God" mean in relation to Nimrod? Is he part Nephilim? Did Nimrod actually become a Nephilim when it says he was a mighty hunter before the Lord?
No, Nimrod was related to Semiramis, obviously. Nimrod is the founder of false religion. He is somebody who began to bring demonic idolatry into human worship. He may have been, remember, at that point, people were still food gatherers to a large degree. Okay, they were not, I'm not saying there was no agriculture or things like that, and they were fishing, but people were food gatherers and they were hunters. The better hunter you were, the higher your social status. You know what I'm saying? I got a moose, I got an elk, I got a whatever. So being a good hunter demonstrated your prowess as a male, and also had something to do with your social status and level of affluence, because you could provide food, high protein food. Now, the term hunter has a figurative and typological meaning in Scripture, and I don't dismiss that Nimrod is somebody who that applies to. The Scriptures talk about fishers and hunters. Hunters tend to be bad people. Satan goes around like a lion, seeing someone he can devour. Nimrod was a devourer. He devoured people with a demonic power. Okay, he's in the character of the devil. Satan goes around like a roaring lion, seeing someone he can devour. Well, Nimrod was a human personification of that satanic trait as a hunter. So there is a natural meaning to it, but there is also a spiritual symbolism to it. I hope that answers the question. If you want to really understand more about Nimrod and Semiramis, you need to read the book of Yasher. Not as doctrine, it's not canon of Scripture, but it is history and it's worth reading.
All right. Thank you, Jacob. If the rapture and the resurrection take place between the 6th and 7th seals, and Jesus removes the faithful church at this time, what scriptures support that he returns an additional time to fight the Antichrist? Wouldn't this be a third coming, or does Jesus not personally come for the church, but we are merely taken up between the 6th and 7th seal? The bride meets him in the air.
Okay. There are those who have described it as a third coming, but Scripture does not. What Scripture does is uses the term parousia, okay, his appearing, okay, his appearing. The dead in Christ rise first and are resurrected. Anesthesia, no death, okay? Then there is the snatching away, the harpazo, the rapture. These are concurrent, virtually concurrent. This is the parousia, okay? When he comes back to establish his kingdom, however, that is actually the coming. When his feet stand on the Mount of Olives, he comes back with the saints and establishes the kingdom. Let me explain this. The first coming, as it were, is only aerial. It is only aerial. we meet the Lord in the air. He does not literally return to earth. He returns for purposes of gathering his elect, of a rescue and a resurrection. It is aerial. We meet the Lord in the air. When he comes back after that, it is terrestrial. His feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. Where do we get this? We have to interpret the book of Revelation as fulfilling the Old Testament prophecies that speak about it. The book of Zechariah, chapters 12 through 14, speak about these events the most and the clearest. Even though there are other places, comprehensively, the book of Zechariah speaks about it the most and gives us the most background as to what the book of Revelation means. In Zechariah chapter 12, we see a picture of the aerial return of Christ. Okay? They'll look upon me who they have pierced. Zechariah 12:10. The rapture will be secret only insofar as we cannot know the day or the hour in which it takes place. Once it takes place, it'll not be a secret. People will say, hide us from him who's on the throne, all this kind of stuff. Let the rocks fall on us. Is the rapture secret? It is secret in that we don't know the day or the hour it happens. Yes, it's a secret rapture. Will the event itself be secret when it transpires? No, that is an invention of Darbyism. Keep reading Zechariah chapter 12, bearing in mind, as always, that there are no chapter divisions in the original canon. When you get to chapter 13, you see the terrestrial return. His feet stand on the Mount of Olives. After he comes aerially, he comes terrestrially. 2/3 of the Jews are wiped out. After the rapture and resurrection, God turns his focus back to the salvation of Israel, primarily, under the darkest circumstances imaginable. So in Zechariah, you see the aerial return in chapter 12, and you see the terrestrial return in chapter 13, and then the millennium, chapter 14, okay? The book of Revelation shows the fulfillment of the prophecies of Zechariah. I hope that explains it.
Our next question, it asks about Revelation 5, verses 9 through 10, and I'll read it for you. And they sang a new song saying, "You are worthy to take the scroll and to open the seal, because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased for God persons from every tribe and language and people and nations. You have made them to be a kingdom of priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth." Now, the question for that is, these are the Old Testament saints and those who have gone before us post-resurrection?
I'm not understanding the question as phrased. Who do you mean by this? Are they referring to the 24 elders of chapter 4?
No, they're the ones who are singing, in Revelations 5, 9, and 10. I believe the question is, are these the Old Testament saints and those who have gone before us post-resurrection?
In Revelation chapter 5, we see it is the angelic majesties, beginning in verse 11, the angels who are praising the Lamb. He's asking about chapter 5. I saw in his right hand. Yeah, okay. A strong angel proclaiming it, and no one in heaven was found to open it. As I said, this refers to the angelic witnesses, but also to the 24 elders in the previous chapter. Do you see that? And one of the elders said to me, "Stop weeping. Behold the Lion from the tribe of Judah." Those 24 elders are the ones, together with the angelic majesties. Those 24 elders are the 12 apostles of the New Testament and the 12 sons of Jacob from the 12 tribes of Israel from Genesis chapter 49. It's the 12 and the 12, okay? It is they who are there. And he came and he took the book out of the right hand of him who sat on the throne, okay? The elders on a lamb standing as if slain, having 7 horns, 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits, which actually means 7-fold spirits of God from the book of Isaiah, okay, sat out into all the earth. And he came and took the book out of the hand of him who sat on the throne. And when he had taken the book, the 4 living creatures, the 24 elders fell down. It has to do with the Tzevaot Shemaim, the hosts of heaven, the angelic majesties, and the 24 elders. That's what it has to do with. It does not have to do with the raptured church or the resurrected church as yet. They do not show up sequentially until after that.
All right. Thank you, Jacob. I've recently heard some near-death experiences on video. Some of them say they feel this indescribable love, but do not attribute it to Jesus. The question is, can Satan really mimic that sort of love? I know he can act like an angel of light, but can he counterfeit love?
Satan always tries to counterfeit love. Just think of a young couple who falls into fornication before marriage. And some guy is trying to sexually seduce a young lady without being married to her. But he is pretending that he has all the sincerity and devotion and affection for her someone would have maritally. Yet they're not married. It is simply a counterfeit of love. In this case, manifested in exercise through human agency. But it's a sin. The devil's on back of it to a degree, and it is a counterfeit of love. Satan always tries to counterfeit love. We have different kinds of love in the Greek language in the New Testament. I just described a counterfeit of eros, the sexual, romantic love in the sexual sense. Okay. Let's talk about filio, brotherly love. You see liberal Protestantism, the United Nothing in New York, the World Council of Churches. They're all based on a filial love. The brotherhood of man, kumbaya. Of course, in order to have real erotic love, there must be agape love, God's love. And in order for there to have a real filial love, a real brotherly love, there must be agape, God's love. How good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell together in unity. But that unity that people try to get through human brotherly love is only possible in Christ when you have one spirit. The unity of man is not possible. People have always tried it. The Antichrist is going to try it in Daniel chapter 2. They tried it at the Tower of Babel. This unity of man to deify himself. Yes, it's counterfeited by the devil. If you can believe it, there is even one case in Scripture where somebody agape unconditionally loved evil. Satan even attempts to have his corrupted version, if you want to call it a counterfeit, of agape. It's possible to unconditionally love evil by demonic power, by satanic power. Okay. So the answer is yes. Satan always tries to counterfeit and mimic. But in the end, it's the real thing that's going to endure, not the counterfeit.
Thank you, Jacob. Moving on to our next question, real quickly. Let's see. Can you please help and give some understanding to Daniel 11 with the kings of the south and north, and understanding on specifically verse 34? Let me bring that up. Daniel 11, verse 34.
Okay, this is a big subject. I couldn't go into it now in any depth or length. It would take too long. I would point you to my book on the Antichrist called Shadows of the Beast. We go into it in greater depth in that book. However, I will answer the question. In Daniel chapter 11, up until verse 36, yes? Up until verse 36, you have a historical fulfillment of it in Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV, from the Seleucid dynasties. This is the background of Hanukkah, the Jewish feast of dedication that Jesus celebrated in John 10, where Antiochus set up the image of himself in the temple as being Zeus, the corruption of the Greek word for Theos, God, and then slaughtered the pig in the temple, the abomination of desolation. That happened up until verse 36. From Daniel 11, verse 36 onward, has not happened. The Antichrist will come in the character of Antiochus into a rebuilt temple of some description in Jerusalem. And he will recapitulate in some way what Antiochus did, but then go beyond verse 36 and fulfill the rest of it. Now, I'm trying to understand the specific details of what you're asking. James, can you read the question again?
Yes, so they specifically want to know about verse 34. When they fall, they will
Okay, let me
receive a
explain
little
that.
help.
Let me explain that. It begins in verse 33. Those who have understanding will give understanding to the many. When they fall, they will receive a little help, it says in Daniel 11. This happened with the Maccabees. They understood the betrayal by the Jews who collaborated with the Seleucids, led by Menelaus, who they assassinated, the Maccabees, as partisans, as Jewish freedom fighters, at Modain, the village of Modain, not far from Jerusalem, but not in the Judean hills, down in an area known as the Shvilah, to the west of Jerusalem. That's where the Maccabees, a family of priests, came from. There was the father and the 5 sons. 2 or 3 of the sons were betrayed from within. There were people who joined themselves to them, who pretended to be on their side, but who had their own agenda. And the Maccabees were killed by traitors from within their own ranks. Okay? In the end, God gave them the victory, and the temple was rededicated. The story of Hanukkah took place, again celebrated by Jesus in John chapter 10, verse 22. The Hebrew feast of light and miracles, and so on. At the close of the age, that'll happen again. Deception will run amok. There are going to be people among both the Jews and within the church who are going to collaborate with Antichrist, the way Menelaus and others among the Jews collaborated with Antiochus and the Seleucids. The church is going to be betrayed from within and from without. False brothers will betray faithful brothers. Many will fall away and betray one another. There'll be tremendous deception and tremendous darkness. But there will be those who understand. Those who understand what's happening from the scripture by the illumination of the Holy Spirit will warn the others, will tell the others. But they will become targets, not just by the Seleucids, but by false brothers who will betray them. You have to read the story of the Maccabees in the book of Maccabees, 1st and 2nd Maccabees. It is again not canon, not a basis of doctrine, but it is history. Valid and important history in understanding scripture because Jesus himself celebrated it and made reference to the abomination, what Antiochus did, saying it was going to happen again. So, to understand the story of Hanukkah is absolutely imperative to understand the future meaning of Daniel 11, 33 to 35. On the Moriel website, there's a catalog, and you will find a 3-part series. I think it was 3-part when it was first recorded. There were still things like CDs and whatever. Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. That series is called Christmas, Hanukkah, and the Return of Christ, or the Nativity, Hanukkah, the Return of Christ, one or the other. You can get it for free download. I suggest you listen to it. There, I address your questions at greater length, but I'd also point you to the book, Shadows of the Beast. That is the most depth I can go into in a Q&A format. It's a huge subject. James, next question.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jacob. I think this is going to be the last question for today. Jacob, Psalm 83, verse 6. What are the nations today? And I will read you the Psalm. 83:6, the tabernacles of Edom, the Ishmaelites of Moab, the Hagarenes, Gebal, Ammon, and Amalek, the Philistines and the inhabitants of Tyre, Ashur also joined with them. They have holpen the children of Lot.
Okay. There's a guy called Bill Salas who's built an entire ministry almost on this psalm, looking at it prophetically. These nations are the nations that surround Israel. Edom is southern Jordan. Moab is central Jordan. Ammon is northern Jordan. Philistia is the Gaza Strip. Tyre is southern Lebanon. Okay? The Ishmaelites were the original Egyptians. Not the Arab Egyptians, but the original, the Egypt. Anthropologically, these people are not exactly the same in every case as they were in ancient times. But the geographical lands are always the same, and they surround Israel. Some people, like Bill Salas, put a tremendous prophetic importance on this psalm. I do not say it does not have prophetic significance, but I also say it has had significance for other times in history. When the Babylonians invaded, conquering Judah in 585 BC, these surrounding nations, particularly in Jordan, rejoiced at the destruction of Israel, only for they themselves to be destroyed by Babylon later. We read this in the book of Obadiah, particularly verse 15. So these nations still exist geographically, and some of them still exist anthropologically. At least the people who live there are the descendants of the Ancient One. But it talks mainly about Egypt, Gaza, Jordan, and Lebanon, the nations that immediately surround Israel.
Finally,
It's
it ends with.
interesting. There's not a
Go
major
ahead.
emphasis on Syria, but that's. Go ahead, I'm listening.
So finally, that psalm ends with the word Selah. Could you please tell us what that means?
Selah is a denotation in the Psalms that tells you, from a musical and poetic term, what kind of psalm it is. Scholars debate, they often debate the exact meaning of those kinds of terms. Selah is not the only one. Selah could mean a pause or a crescendo. Again, a musical interlude or a musical pause. There's others called maskil, which could mean like maskil, something that you contemplate or meditate on. And it is more of a literary term for poetry, and it may have a teaching aspect, something didactic about it. Another is called naktam, which is an epigram, like a saying. And it's sometimes used in Psalms that talk about atonement. And another is Sheol, which has to do with Hades or the netherworld. These are musical and poetic notations to tell what kind of a psalm it is. It would also determine the whether it's major or minor, whether it is sung fortissimo or quietly, or whether it was a highly its tempo was driven by percussion, things like this. Those denotations would determine the way the psalm was to be performed when used in worship publicly.
Thank you for that, Jacob. Finally, we want to thank you all for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and please, if you have a chance, please share Moriel, this Catching Up Jacob episode. Not only that, but all of our lessons to other Christians. We definitely want to continue to try to get the word out. And if I could, Pierre, thank you for being with us this week. Do you think you could close us out with a word of encouragement for the Christians that are watching?
Certainly. And thank you for having me this week. I've been spending quite a bit of time in Daniel with our fellowship group. And my encouragement to everyone would be a Daniel. We are in perilous times. We see what's coming. We know that it's going to get worse. So at the moment, it's dark, but it's going to get darker. And I think, we've got to look at Daniel and do what Daniel did. We put God first and above everything else. And that is our focus. And when, it gets difficult and persecution comes, do not be afraid. Matthew 10, verse 28, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Let's be reminded that we focus on Jesus, and the troubles of this world are temporary, but the amazing time that we will have with the Lord will be permanent. So blessings to you all, and have a good week.
Thank you so much. And God bless everyone. Take care. Until next time.
Give us a like, recommend us, share us, and please lift up Jesus and tell people about him while we still have time to do so.
Amen. Hello, and thank you for watching Moriel TV. There are so many things that are happening at Moriel Ministries worldwide. From the Philippines to Japan, to India to Africa, and back to Europe and the United States, so many of our brothers and sisters are spreading the good news of Jesus Christ to this lost world. We are so thankful for your prayers. God has been faithful and has blessed us in so many ways. If you'd like to partner with our efforts abroad and at home, please take a moment to click the link in the description and help us as the Lord leads you. Thank you very much, and God bless.